Welcome to the fourth episode of Frakttalks podcast series, where we take a deeper look at some of the best investigative works around the world. In this episode, we talk to Serdar Vardar about International Journalists Consortium's latest project, where they investigated the abuse of honorary consuls around the world. We talk to Serdar about his involvement, the investigation methodology, and the findings of the Shadow Diplomats Investigation. Enjoy.
I started journalism quite late. I think I was 31 years old when I started Deutsche Welle's program, traineeship program, which is like an 18 months traineeship where they invite people from different parts of the world who has kind of like an international background and who is interested in journalism, who wants to become journalists. Before that, I was living in South America for 15 years and I was doing different stuff. I was organizing film festivals and media festivals, among other things. I was always a very huge consumer of news, but I was never on the producing part of it.
Sounds like a very interesting program. So have you started the investigative part right away?
Not actually. I mean, investigation is always part of kind of any reporting. But when we talk about investigative journalism, we mostly talk about long-term projects that requires you to go and keep on adding data, keep on adding information, keep on adding data until you reach to a point where you feel like your investigation came to a conclusion and you have something to offer to the public for the public good. My first big investigative project was with the Pandora Papers, but before that I have done quite a lot short-term investigative reporting.
Any particular example?
Well, I was into, I don't know if you remember when there were news about Venezuela and Turkey, some alleged cocaine trafficking, some alleged gold trafficking. I have done some reporting on that. First big project that took like months and months of work was Pandora Papers.
How did you get started with ICIJ and what did you observe inside about the working process?
When the Pandora Papers project started, it starts, of course, like a year or sometimes longer than the publication date. It starts way before for the journalists, of course. When that process started, Pelin, my colleague Pelin, she's the only active member from Turkey in ICIJ, and she's been going through the 12 million of documents. And also there are lots of documents in Spanish. She needed someone to help her basically scan through those documents. And that's how she invited me so that I can help her with the documents, basically the ones in Spanish, but also the ones in English, because it's just like millions of documents. So that's how I started with the ICIJ. And ICIJ is an international consortium of investigative journalists. So they have their core team, and then they have their core members, and then they have their partners. So I started as a partner. The member Pelin invited me to join on that project. Now with the Shadow Diplomats, they invited me again. ICIJ invited me to join the investigation on Shadow Diplomats. So basically that's how it works. They have a project, and then according to the needs of the reporting of that and the investigation of that project, they invite journalists.
As far as I can tell from outside, the two investigations were quite different from one another. On the Pandora Papers, there were a lot of millions of documents which had to be transcribed, I guess, and like processed somehow. In the Shadow Diplomats, I don't think you had a lot of like evidence or data. You personally contacted some of the people and did your own Google and online search.
Yeah, for the Shadow Diplomats, the difference is there was no leaks and we created our own database. Every journalist group from each country, they made a list of their own honorary diplomats, and then they did their own investigation on those honorary consuls, and then we shared information with ourselves, within each other. For example, we would report, hey, look at this, there's an honorary consul in Turkey representing the country X, let's say country X, and then we would write it, and a journalist from country X would be like, oh, this is interesting for us. We know this and this about this person, and then we would start kind of like exchange information.
And also the organization structure is very interesting to me because like there are thousands of journalists, they all do their own research. And how do they check out one another's research to see if there's anything that can be
Yeah, we basically have a structure like a forum. We publish our findings in a forum, but before every investigation starts, we kind of decide, or the SIG already creates a landmark and creates a framework around it, and then we discuss interesting aspects, interesting angles to it, and then create categories within that investigation.
So has there been a point where you collaborated with other journalists from different parts of the world, for example?
Yeah, definitely. For example, there was a honorary consul of Turkey in Syria, but he is no longer honorary consul, so we didn't see him. We couldn't find him. But a journalist from Syria had her eyes on him, and she shared the information on this person. And it was an interesting case because he was added to a sanctions list by EU because he's a supporter of Assad regime, and he was being suspected of kind of like transferring money to the regime and stuff. So, but then he appealed to that decision and then had a strong lawyer, and then they took him out of the list. So I don't think I would have found him very easily because we also have a deadline, and then there are like hundreds of people. But this Syrian journalist found him, and she shared the information.
How would you describe the research question of the shadow diplomats?
So the idea is there is this international system, there is this global system that gives some people some privileges along with responsibilities, of course. And this is a system that is not very well known in public. Not many people know about the honorary consuls, and not a lot of people know their privileges, not a lot of people know their responsibility. If honorary consuls are using their privileges to kind of like escape from the security forces, or are they really doing their job? But there are honorary consuls, as our investigation showed, that there are terrorist organizations who use this scheme to be able to enter and get out of the countries where normally they wouldn't be able to enter or get out, or people who use these privileges to smuggle out historical artifacts.
So maybe it would be good to talk about the privileges of becoming an honorary consul. So what does that title grant people?
In most of the countries, it grants you a passport that can be a diplomatic passport or a special service passport, depending on the country. That opens a lot of doors. Also, like I mentioned, you can say that this bag is a diplomatic bag, and then it's harder for security forces to search those bags. These people can get car licenses with a diplomatic sign on it, and they can act as if they have priority on the roads, on the streets, even though they don't, but just because of having the diplomatic sign there in their licenses. They are included in the protocol lists of those cities. For example, if you're an honorary consul in Istanbul, then you are included in the protocol list, and the protocol list is kind of like, you get to be in the same line with the governors, with the most important businessmen, and so it's kind of like a privileged club.
Have there been any red flags that you've noticed just before going into the specifics?
I mean, when we were doing Pandora Papers, we already asked this question to ourselves. We talked about this with Pelin, and we said, because there were already we have seen some honorary consuls using offshore schemes, and we were wondering if this is a story or not. And then it was a very good surprise that ICJ wanted to do this story. So way before this story, we were wondering if honorary consuls are using their privileges for their own good. We have seen that there are people who are honorary consuls, but there are no information on these people, which is weird because when you're an honorary consul, you're supposed to be part of a respected group of people from that city, meaning that the local people know you, they trust you, you're a trustworthy person. But it was weird that there are so many people who has almost no information, no very public, immediate information about them. So that was one of the red flags. And of course, we have these group of tender stars, public tender stars, who get all the public tenders, and to see that a lot of them are also honorary consuls is also like a red flag. And also another red flag was there are lots of countries in the world who share no information about who represents them, who are acting as honorary consuls on their name. That was also a red flag, because the information on honorary consuls are not very transparent. The idea was to make a list of active honorary consuls, and then go one by one as deep as possible on the person and find important information about their occupation, their age, if they have been any scandals, if they have any PIP, which is like a politically exposed people, if they're like part of a family who has politicians, if they're part of a family, who has been into scandals, or basically check these kind of public information on them, and then do this for almost 400 times, and then try to see the patterns. When we start, we didn't have an idea how in the recent years more and more younger people starts to become honorary consuls, and then why are young people becoming honorary consuls? Because when we talk to experts from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or ex-diplomats, all they say is like, yeah, most of the honorary consuls are old people, very respected middle-aged or old people. Everybody says that, but we see more and more young people. So like, okay, why is this? Look at this article. They can be exempt from the military responsibility. So is this a coincidence, or is like, so you started to, the more you have the data, the more questions start to appear in your mind. But when we started the investigation, we didn't have a specific question rather than to see how many honorary consuls do we have they used their privileges to commit a crime or not. We didn't have anything else than this question. But the more we have data, the more we started to see some patterns.
So I think it would be great to talk about some examples that stand out. I also took notes, I can remind you. As far as I remember from the articles, there is no exposition of like one single person who used their title to commit an illegal crime, right?
In Turkey, we couldn't detect someone using their privileges of honorary consul to commit a crime. Mm-hmm. Maybe they did, but we couldn't detect. And that's also one of the things, like, it is difficult to detect because you have those privileges. There are two examples that stands up in my mind. One of them is this honorary consul of Italy in Egypt. He basically had tens of thousands of historical artifacts from Egyptian, all ancient Egypt artifacts. And he sent all of it to his house in Italy in a diplomatic container. And he smuggled them out. There were thousands of golden coins there too. He smuggled them out. And the only reason the container was opened later, and this happened in Italy, like in Egypt, it passed. He took them out of Egypt. And Italy, they only noticed it because the guy, the honorary consul, didn't go there in time, and there was a mistake in the papers. That's why the Italian police opened the container, because of a mistake in the papers. If it wasn't, so this is how we knew about this case, because there was an error in the paper. I'm telling this because I want to figure it out in a country like Turkey, where we know that the judicial system is not acting very well. There are lots of people in Turkey who doesn't seem that we're living in a just society, that that the state is not doing a great job of finding criminals, especially crimes that are, that has a revenue that are higher than, like if you steal baklava or if you steal simit, then okay, you're gonna get caught. But if you're stealing millions, then it's, in Turkey, it's, lots of people think that they don't get caught very easily. So what I want to say is that we couldn't find anything in Turkey, but it doesn't mean these honorary consuls don't use their privileges to commit crimes.
I mean, the exemption from search is a very crucial like privilege, I guess. I mean, there might be drug smuggling of işte, artifacts and all. It's really hard to detect it through journalism and through online
Yeah,
retail.
exactly. And also, we don't have access to most of the judicial cases. A lot of the judicial cases we don't have access to the documents of the judicial cases. There are other countries like, for example, Brazil, Chile, or European countries. You can see the judicial cases, but in Turkey we cannot see it, so we don't know. I was saying in Turkey, it was interesting to see the patterns, like patterns of the politicians, of the people from the soccer world, people from the public tenders, and to see kind of like we see again and again the same names. We see again and again the same political party. We see again and again these construction people, being involved in shootings, honorary consuls, and drugs, and so it's kind of like interesting to see this pattern. But an honorary consul of Israel in Italy, he was being investigated of illegally funding a political party in Italy, a far-right political party in Italy.
He was carrying cash, right?
Yeah, he was being investigated on that, and police decided to go to his office and search for evidence, and they did. They went to his office, and then he said, "All this part of my office are diplomatic papers," and then the police couldn't touch those papers. They couldn't see what's inside them. Yeah, so it is very easy to abuse this power, but there is not one single name in Turkey that I can say for sure with evidence that they abuse their power.
Is it safe to say that the honorary consul title is given out to the businessmen and the people around the AKP government?
I wouldn't say. Normally, you are in general, honorary consuls most of the time are businessmen, and the countries want businessmen, trustworthy businessmen to represent them, because they don't get paid. So these people need to have a good economical situation to be able to perform this duty well, because they would be paying from their own pocket if they organize an event or something.
Do you think the majority of the honorary consuls are associated with AKP in Turkey?
No, I wouldn't say the majority of them are associated with AKP, but for sure I can say the majority of the politicians or politicians' families who are honorary consuls, majority of them are from AKP and AKP circle, because honorary consul is a very old structure, so it precedes AKP. But the thing is, also interesting point to figure out to mention is that in 2011, for example, there were 108 honorary consuls, but then in 2016 it became 340, if I'm not mistaken. So in 5 years it almost doubled, and we don't know why.
Maybe have you checked the newcomers? Maybe they were more likely to be associated with AKP.
Yeah, we checked the newcomers. We checked everybody. Yeah.
Are they majority AKP government associated?
No.
It's a twisted story in that sense. It's not really hard to say for sure that all of them are associated.
I mean, you can see, for example, the president of trade union of, I don't know, X, like city X in Turkey. You can say that he's pro-AKP, but it doesn't mean he's a AKP, he's not officially an active politician in AKP.
I think you've reached out to the businessmen after you made the investigation and before writing it.
It is a process that needs to be part of any reporting, basically, but I don't think it's very ethical to kind of report on somebody without talking to this person. You always need to have the aspect of the person that the story is about, basically. And also, it's also good always to have at least two sides of one story. We sent questions to the people that we knew, that we wanted to mention by name that we were going to run their story, run their background information. We contacted these people and asked them questions, and most of them didn't answer. Some of them answered, and we included them in the report.
Do you give like a time notification? So like you have to, can you talk about that?
Yeah, we say please answer until this date. If you don't, then we will act as if you don't want to reply.
Thanks for sparing time, Serdar. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for opening up the space. Yeah, I just want to say in general that that I think it's important to kind of like create these kind of stories for also archival purposes. That when somebody in 10 years, when they look back and see all these names or all these people who were honorary consuls, like it's good in that sense, in an archival sense, so that we have this information on public, so that people can access to this information and use it to further continue their own investigation.
Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next episode.